1600 is manageable. And if you're watching this video, you love chess and you need to see improvement. But any single time you go on a bit of a run and gain some elo, you go on an equal and opposite tilt streak. And that's if you're lucky. Most of you, you're gonna lose so much elo that your goal is just trying to get back to where you were before the tilt streak. The purpose of this video is to provide a clear and concise plan of action that you could follow. And if you follow it properly, I guarantee you're gonna gain ELO. So why should you even listen to me? There are FMs, GMs, IMs all over YouTube giving sort of chess advice. Why listen to me? I've been stuck at the exact same plateaus as you. 1100, 1200, 1300, 1400, 1450. Technically on chess.com, it's the top 98th percentile. It's easier to learn from somebody that's closer to your level. Someone like Hikaru was going through the struggles that we experienced maybe when he was 6, 7, or 8.
Sorry.
If you were 900, the reason you're 900 is because you have a knowledge base of a basic average 900. If you're 1600, you have the knowledge base of a 1600. So the question becomes, how do I attain the knowledge base of a 1600 and beyond? Now, over time, you will gain this exact knowledge base by brute force method. You spam games over and over and over again, and you build a foundation and database of tactical sequences that you can draw upon in the future. Win or lose, this is happening in the background. This is the least effective, least deliberate form of practice and learning and acquiring the knowledge that we just talked about. Most of you that are stuck are in this category. If we can just build the knowledge base of what we're trying to attain, we can climb. The challenge lies in knowing what to practice, act of actual practice, and being consistent. And I think this is actually true for almost everything and any skill in life. This video will be broken down into 3 phases: the opening, the middle game, and the end game. You must have an opening repertoire if you're interested in winning. This will not have to be some 15 deep lines of theory for every opening. No, a reasonable number of moves for every common opening you encounter is key. Keeping in mind that the purpose of the opening is to liberate your minor pieces from the back rank and into battle. Here's a personal example. I looked into my opening explorer and saw that I was losing a lot of games with black. I decided to learn an opening response for every common opening that I saw with black. From there, I learned that the French further divided into the advanced French, the exchange French, Tarrasch. There's a number of common ones that I kept running into. I studied the themes and a decent number of computer moves for each of those iterations. And this essentially allowed me to get good positions out of the opening. Similarly with white, I'm a Spanish game player, but I learned how to respond to the caro-kann. I learned how to respond to the Sicilian. I learned how to respond to the French. Any common opening, I learned and memorized 5 to 10 moves and actually watched like some YouTube videos or something to see how I could tackle it. So now I'm comfortable with pretty much any opening that a 1550 to a 1650 can throw at me. Given my thesis, in order to improve, I need more depth and breadth of opening knowledge to get to the next level. The first resource that I'm going to be talking about is Logical Chess Move by Move. This book is insanely valuable. It breaks down every single move of historical games, starting with sort of E4 games and finishing with D4 games. So here how it's broken down. The author will literally go through historical games and talk to you about why each move is being made. So for example, if the first move was D4, why was the first move D4? What does D4 do? Why is it useful? So I'm going to read to you an excerpt just from the first move D4, and you can get an idea of how this book is going to go. D4. Beginning the game with this pawn move releases 2 pieces at 1 stroke. So that's going to be the queen and the bishop. This is as much as white can achieve in 1 move in the way of getting pieces off the back rank and into play. Also, D4 controls important central squares. So think about that passage, but with every single move in the game. The second resource, and you're going to be hearing this a lot, is Daniel Naroditsky's speedruns. He has so many speedruns with different opening repertoires. The easiest thing you can do, go to his speedruns, see exactly what his repertoires are, learn his opening responses, and he talks through, just like the book, talks through most of his moves in great detail. So many people have zero idea what to do once they've developed their pieces. They just don't know what to do. Where should my pieces go? Where's the best square for my knight? Where should I put my bishop? Should I even push this pawn? If I push this pawn, will it block my bishop for the rest of the game? A lot of people are not even thinking about this. There's a very good chance you're actually in this category. Mindlessly moving in the middle game. No clear plan. So the middle game, as I understand it, is putting your pieces on the best squares possible while taking advantage of the weaknesses and the imbalance in your opponent's position. Improving here is not like in the opening repertoire where you just have an opening repertoire and you start memorize. This is more about concepts, and that's why I think the middle game, it's very important to study past games, and the resource section is going to be very important. By the way, if you're still blundering, this can't help you with that. So the middle game is where a lot of the blundering is going to happen. So if you're still blundering a lot, look at your opponent's checks, captures, and threats, because most blunders are purely lazy. You're just not really paying attention to the board. Maybe you're multitasking. Maybe you're listening to something else. That could just be fixed with consciousness. So I'll be giving you a brief breakdown of the book, but realistically, if you want to accelerate, you're going to want to read this book or at least study the concepts that I'm going to bring up right now. So the first one is king position. So if your opponent has slow development and hasn't even castled his king, this is one of your main paths to victory. We're going to exploit his centralized king with rapid development and try to open things up right away. Maybe your opponent castled queenside. What does that mean for you? Where are the openings? Kingside, right? Pawns. They can't go backwards, so you have to just stop moving them willy-nilly and stop trading them for no good reason when you haven't found any candidate move. Every pawn push leaves a weakness or a hole in your position. Sometimes that's not a big deal, and sometimes it's a huge deal and it's going to cost you the game. Sometimes a knight is going to snuggle into it. Other times a pawn push is going to end up closing in a bishop or blocking in the path of a rook. This is what people are thinking about when they're moving their pawns. They're just not moving them. And you have to be a person who's deliberately thinking about why are you moving a pawn. So in summary regarding the pawns, before making a pawn move, think about, is this making it easier for my pieces or is it making it worse for my pieces? Is my position going to be better or worse after this? Knights and bishops. Learning and building plans regarding the relationship between these two pieces is crucial. Just hypothetically, you have a closed position. There's a bunch of pawns on the board. It's all locked up. You probably know you'd rather have a knight than a bishop. But what if your opponent had one knight and one bishop and you had two knights? The objective of your game will be trading your knights at any cost so that you can exploit this closed position as much as possible. That's an objective in the middle game. That's your plan. That's what you're going to try to do. Another thing to know about knights is they're optimal positions on the 4th, 5th, and 6th rank. So if your knights are just sitting back the entire game, they're worthless. They're like pawns or even worse. So consider you want to advance your knights. And bishops, their scopes, open positions, they love them. If you're in a game where you have two bishops and your opponent has two knights, maybe it's your objective to trade as many pawns as possible and open the position. Keep it wide open so your bishops can outshine these knights. Rooks, essential idea with the rooks is you want them on open files. Open files have fat advantages for rooks, and you probably already know this, and especially if the position's about to evaporate into the endgame. Queens I haven't gotten to yet. I haven't studied it enough yet, so I can't really talk about too much about the queens, but I think in general when you have a queen, you just want it to be in an obnoxious and safe position where they can't really get to it, but they know it's just dominating a lot of squares. The nice thing about learning about middle games, and as you continue to propel and learn more, the fight becomes less about who blundered first, and it becomes more about who's going to give up this positional weakness and who's going to take advantage of it, who's going to allow it. It's like a mini game within the game, as opposed to just like, this guy just blundered his piece, now I'm just going to trade everything and we're going to try to win the game. The middle game is very fun. The book that I would recommend is a book called How to Reassess Your Chess. And this book breaks down what we just talked about in so much more detail. It talks about pawns, kings, rooks, knights, bishops, all of the pieces, queens, how they interact with each other. And it also talks about later on in the book, the metagame of like being aggressive and your mentality when you're playing. And the second recommendation, again, is Daniel's speedruns, Daniel Naroditsky. During the middle game, you'll see a grandmaster talk about why he's making a move every single time. I mean, I don't know why. They're quite popular, but you gotta watch these. This stage of the game has the potential to give you the most rating game, 100%. Why? The end game is the most neglected, sloppy part of the game, where tactics are missed, pieces are hung, people don't know what they're doing. If it's improved, rating gain will be free. And eventually, you'll pray for the queen trade as opposed to running away from it at all costs. That being said, what makes endgames so hard is that they're extremely situational. It's very difficult to have some sort of strategy or plan always that's always going to work for you. There's hardly a one-size-fits-all idea that's going to encompass the end game. And that's why there's so much differences, it seems at least, even in the professional level, between people's end game levels. Improving here will require actually studying past end games and building up a large enough database for yourself so you know general ideas and you can start calculating and thinking about how you're going to approach your end game. And then eventually you'll see these patterns in your games, and a lot of it will become second nature. What should I do in this situation? What should I do in that situation? Yes, one general thing that's been useful for me, and this is super like just low key, we're going to get into the resources in a bit, but whenever possible, get your rooks on the 7th. I mean, it may sound like it's basic information, but when your rooks are on the 7th rank, there's just pure oppression. So if your opponent is lackadaisical, and maybe in the lower ELOs they will be, get your rooks on the 7th and just watch them work. The book I'm going to be talking about is Mastering Endgame Strategy. This is a very simple book, a bunch of scenarios. First scenarios are regarding kings. When is it best, or just scenarios when it's best to move the king first. Then pawns. What should you do? When should you do this pawn exchange? How the masters and the master games dealt with those situations. Then rooks, rook and pawn endgames, queen and pawn endgames. It's just like, it builds that database that I just talked about. Unfortunately, the Danya speedruns, he doesn't get to the endgames as much because he's usually beating those guys pretty bad. I mean, later on when he starts getting into the speedruns of like 2200 and like not 2000 to 2200, that's when you're going to be able to see those endgames a little bit more. But he also has a playlist on endgames, so I would say go to his channel, watch those endgame videos. Here, I think you're going to realize that this is a lot more work than you might have thought. And for some of you, maybe you've reached 17, 1800 without doing any of this. I'm just telling you what helped me get to that next level. One thing I realized after going to university, most of my classmates were tryhards. Whether they had a cool phase or a cool look or whatever it was, you go to the library, they're sitting there grinding by themselves. This is my experience. So if you want to get better at chess, in my view, you're going to have to sit down, you're going to have to grind. And this doesn't mean it's not going to be fun or anything like that. I think this is what makes it fun, when you get to start implementing and thinking about the game in a deeper way.